we had this viral infection, so to speak, that process has stole charge and given us the symptoms we knew of as that. And so we have to build that charge back up. And that's putting us in this environment. And then once that charge is there, the body kind of has the energy to start getting rid of it. But we have to make sure that detoxification elimination pathways are open. Biggest one that's driving the interference of that is disrupted circadian rhythm, because your body works on this circadian cycle, and it is supposed to clean house at night. It's supposed to detoxify cells. It's supposed to have lymphatic drainage of the brain. It's supposed to do mitophagy, which is the killing of old mitochondria, making healthy new ones. It's supposed to do autophagy, which is the killing of old cells, making new healthy cells. And this process doesn't happen every single night if we are in a disrupted light environment with artificial light, especially after sunset, and if our circadian rhythm is just not synced up to the day-night cycle. Because if we don't get enough light during the day, especially UVA light at mid-morning, and we don't block blue light after sunset, then we don't make enough melatonin. And melatonin is what tells your body to do that cleaning house process at night. And so if you don't do that 1-2 nights, maybe not a big deal. If you don't do that chronically, it's like you never took the trash out in your house, or you never cleaned your house. Eventually, it becomes unlivable. And that's exactly what happens. That polyethylene glycol is just staying in there, staying in your house. And you've got to open up these mechanisms to get it out. And that's how we do it. But the other ones are sweating. So lots of people aren't sweating enough, especially in winter. That's not happening. People aren't, moving their bodies enough to sweat. Constipation is a huge thing. That's another elimination pathway that is not open for a lot of people. And then the poor sleep, the lack of deep restorative cleansing sleep is the other big one. So you have to charge up your body first, and then you have to optimize circadian rhythm, optimize sleep, and you will recover. And I've worked with enough people now to know that you will. And I highlight one of those case studies in the article that I wrote. That's the approach. And honestly, we touched on this. That's the approach for most any chronic disease. Charge up your body, detoxify the system, optimize cellular health in the process, and you're gonna be pretty happy with what you find. Every cell has a normal, healthy voltage to it, and every medical student learns that when you're going through medical school. Anybody who takes cellular physiology learns that. That there's this healthy voltage of the cell, and that voltage is held by structured water. So you won't necessarily learn that if you're in medical school or in cell physiology. Structured water, because of the way that it forms, holds a negative charge, and it is what holds the negative charge of a cell. And that net negative voltage that's held there is what keeps the cell healthy and how it maintains its physiological function. And so if you look at studies on anaphylaxis in animals and things like that, what happens is or allergic reaction, what happens is the cells lose voltage. If it happens systemically, it becomes this anaphylactic response that's life-threatening. But they lose their charge, they lose their voltage, they become unstable. And there's actually evidence to show that when you lose that voltage, that mast cells, which are what release histamine and have that inflammatory response, become unstable when the cells lose that voltage. And so that's what creates this massive response of histamine, which is why people go grab the Benadryl and try and suppress the histamine. But really what we should be thinking is build the body's charge back up, because we've injected something that destroys structured water where we lose the charge. And it could happen locally where it was injected to those cells, and we get that allergic red response, or if it's the person's in a poor state of health, it could spread throughout the entire body, affect the structured water in cells everywhere, and we get this full-blown anaphylaxis response. And that can be life-threatening. So that's the anaphylaxis part of it. And that's kind of the allergic response. That's the allergic response is kind of one of the most mild adverse events we saw. The second one is clotting. We saw a lot of pathologic clotting, which should not be normally happening in the tissues or in the vascular system. And I explain this a lot, so I'll kind of go over it briefly here, but there's a talk I did for Antithetic Baltimore conference on my YouTube, which is Resource Your Health. And I go through this in more detail. And I've also been through it on other podcasts as well. But basically, there is some places where the water is liquid in the body. And one of those is the blood. There's also lymphatic vessels and cerebrospinal fluid, things like that. But some of that liquid can structure itself, become more of a gel onto the hydrophilic surface of the vascular system or the lymphatic system or whatever. And when this happens, it does things that prevent clotting. So Rudolf Virchow back in 1856, I think it was, found that there's three things that cause clotting. They are damage to the lining of the artery. They are when we have poor stagnant blood flow, and when we have elements of blood that are too clumped together and sticking together. And if you look at all the properties and all the things that structured water does in the vascular system, it prevents all three of those things from happening. So it forms on the lining of the artery, and because of the way that it forms, it excludes things or protects like the lining of the artery. It keeps things from touching the lining of the artery. So it's protective. It's like bumpers and bowling, protects the ball from going in the gutter. And so there, if we have enough structured water there, it prevents anything from pushing up against the lining of the artery and damaging it. Okay. It also, Dr. Pollack has shown very well at this point, very well established that when you form structured water in a tube, the water flows in the tube without any pump acting on it. So if we want to maintain flow of blood, we need to build structured water. And we've seen that with studies with infrared sauna. If you build structured water with infrared light, blood flow increases tremendously. We've seen that with grounding. Blood flow can increase tremendously with grounding because we're building structured water on arteries, pushing the blood forward, keeping it from being stagnant. And then structured water also forms on the elements of blood, like red blood cells and lipoproteins and things like that. And when it does that, because structured water is electronegatively charged, then the element of blood has a negative charge, and like charges don't like each other, so they kind of repel, and everything stays evenly spaced and not clumped up in the blood. So that's the third thing that contributes to clotting is when elements of blood clump up. So if we have structured water in the body, we prevent those things that create clotting. If we inject something that destroys structured water and the body's trying to mobilize it, get rid of it, which means it's going to be in the bloodstream, we affect the structured water from happening, and that can severely increase our risk of clotting, especially if, again, we're in a state where we're already exposed to other toxins, or we're under high amounts of stress, and there's other things that can contribute to destruction of the structured water and cause clotting. So that's what we saw. We saw blood clotting in the eye. We saw heart attacks, strokes, lots of different, clotting in the lungs, places like that. So that explains the clotting to me and the direct mechanism of how it happened. And then the most interesting one to me was the myocarditis and pericarditis, because for a long time I didn't quite know how to explain that, but now I do. So structured water is also something that decreases friction. It's very slippery, so to speak. So we've all taken an ice cube out of the freezer and it sticks to your finger sometimes, because two solid objects next to each other don't really slide past each other very well. And so when that ice is solid and frozen, it kind of sticks to your finger. But you give it a minute, it'll start to melt because of the heat of your body. And that structured water, now that it's water, not ice, it will form structured water next to those water-loving surfaces of ice and your finger. And the way that structured water forms, it actually creates this little barrier, so there's no friction, and the ice just slips right out of your hand, right? It's hard to hold on to at that point. And then it slides right across the floor. And it's the same reason that you can put an ice skate on and you can skate across the ice, because the ice skate's not a hydrophilic surface, but the ice is. So when the water starts to melt under the skate, it forms structured water on the ice that's left there. Your skate just slides right across it. So it creates this less friction. And so when you understand that structured water is not just in cells, it's not just in the vascular system and things like that, but it's also lines the tissues. And they've shown this. So between organs and things like that, and between organs and, the compartments that the organs sit in, there's structured water on there. And so that creates this situation where there's very little friction and the organs slide around past each other. However, if you inject something that destroys structured water, say around the heart and the pericardium that the heart sits in, then when the heart continues to move back and forth because it's contracting, or the lungs continue to expand and contract when we're breathing, then without that structured water there decreasing the friction, we get inflammation. Just like if you're rubbing two sticks together to make a fire, you can get inflammation of that. And so it makes sense that that's what we saw. We destroyed structured water, and we saw inflammation in the two organs that are subconsciously moving all the time, right? The heart and the lungs. We didn't see it in many others, or we didn't see it as commonly in any others. We saw it in those two because we destroyed the structured water, created that friction, and we get inflammation. And it's very hard to get rid of that inflammation because those things have to keep moving. We can't just stop them. Like with a tendonitis in your elbow, you can just rest your elbow for long enough and it'll go away. But you can't do that with those organs. So yeah. And then the last one is cancer. We're seeing increases in rates of cancer. And that is because cancer, ultimately, cancer cells get a signal to divide and become rapidly dividing when there's a drop in voltage. So this usually should be controlled because we can get controlled cell division, where a drop in voltage is created so the cell can divide and we create new tissue, new cells, things like that. But if it happens pathologically, like something externally comes in and drops the voltage of cells in a more systemic type way or a more expansive type way, it becomes pathologic dividing. And we can get stuck in that dividing state. And that's what cancer is. It's this rapidly dividing undifferentiated cells, but they're getting the signal of that because structured water has been interfered with, which is what many people don't understand in the cancer as a metabolic disease type situation, because it is to an extent, but it's because the mitochondria have become so damaged, structured water formation has been interfered with, cellular voltage drops, and that triggers for this this perpetual dividing of cells, which is what cancer is.